This video is part of my Ubisoft Retrospective series where I will be playing through a few of Ubisoft's video game franchises with the intent of seeing not only how the games themselves have changed over the years, but also how the changing business practices of Ubisoft have influenced the overall design philosophies and quality of the games in each series. If you want to know more about all that hoopla, check out the complete mission statement video and the link in the description. Today we're going to be taking a look at the first game in the Assassin's Creed franchise, which is one of my favorite franchises in all of gamingdom. There have been in total 11 main releases for this series on console. That's a lot of games. And we're going to be looking at all of them in this retrospective review / critique thingy that's happening right now. Except this video is only going to be the first game, you greedy bastards. Fair warning to anyone watching who has not played the first game, this video contains spoilers from the jump. So without further ado, fellow neckbeards and gamer girls, let's take a leap of faith into the first game of the series, Assassin's Creed. And try not to vomit from the cringe of what I just fucking said. Assassin's Creed was released in 2007, 12 years ago as of the making of this video, and was received fairly well all things considered. There were definitely some people who weren't immediate fans of the game and had genuine criticisms of the game that we will get into, but the Metacritic score is sitting at a pretty damn good 81, so most critics like the game. The game's original conceit was for it to be the sequel to Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. Patrice Désilets was the man behind the creation of Sands of Time, and when Ubisoft tasked him with coming up with a sequel to it, he began working on an idea that he was calling Prince of Persia Assassin. Ultimately, Ubisoft decided that the direction the sequel was going in wasn't going to be compatible with the Prince of Persia IP at the time. But the team working on the game suggested that Ubisoft continue development of the game under a new IP, which Ubisoft agreed to. And it was actually one of the higher-ups at Ubisoft that suggested the name Assassin's Creed for the series. When Assassin's Creed was released, it was a very unique game. Its mix of science fiction with historical settings blended together surprisingly well for the most part, and the gameplay was something new and fresh for the 2007 gaming landscape. And I would argue still is to this day. There really isn't any other franchise that is like Assassin's Creed. There are certain franchises in gaming which have inspired a myriad of copycats. Think of how many GTA clones there are, or God of War clones there are, or any other big franchise with a winning formula. But I can't really think of any Assassin's Creed clones. There are definitely games that have legitimately been inspired by the series and taken some elements from it, but no straight up rip-offs as far as I'm aware of anyways. I was originally intending to play the PC version of the game for this video because I wanted that sweet 60 frames per second, baby. But I don't own it since I never had a gaming PC until recently, and even then, calling it a gaming PC is a little charitable. But to my surprise, when I got to the Steam page for the game, guess what? They're charging $20 fucking for it. That's what. $20 for a 12-year-old game that I could pick up from EB Games, because I'm in Canada, for like 2 spawn doolies. Fuck that. Considering I also have to purchase a few games that I don't own, like AC Odyssey, which is still pretty expensive, I'm not going to go out of my way to spend money on a game I already own on console. I did, however, play the game on Xbox One backwards compatibility for the first time, and it was an improvement over the 360. The 360 version of the game has a lot of screen tearing and frame rate drops that weren't constant, but definitely weren't rare either. But on the Xbox One, I didn't notice a single instance of screen tearing or frame rate drops. It's not a jaw-dropping improvement, but hey, I ain't complaining about it. I am complaining about the PC version's price though. Fucking bullshit. Let's begin this critique by taking a look at how the game's overall presentation holds up all these years later. Just to be clear, I am not going to be that hard on any of the older games in the series when it comes to graphics, because obviously they are going to be limited to the technology of their time, so it's really not fair or even sensible to harshly criticize older games or how they look. But with that being said, spoiler alert, it holds up pretty well. Like, yeah, damn, still looks good. The textures and character models are still pretty well detailed and easy to look at. OG 3D game graphics, these are not. The world of AC1 still feels really atmospheric, and sitting atop the various sync points littered across each location still gives me the same feeling of awe and excitement I had the first time I played the game. Granted, it isn't as impressive as the views we get with more modern AC games, but it's still a sight to behold today. And at the time was quite mind-blowing. I really don't want to undersell just how good this game looked when it first came out. It was seriously jaw-dropping for 2007. And the effects of the clouds casting shadows on the ground is still something that I've seen very few games even attempt to do. And the animations, goddamn, the animations still hold their own with games that are released today. Like, look at how right they got it on their first try. And the combat animations are very brutal and still kinda cringe-inducing. Not cringe in a bad way, but cringe in a, oh my god, he's fucking dead kind of way. This one with the arm always makes me uncomfortable. Jesus Christ. The size of the crowds and how many NPCs they managed to fit at one time on screen is really something, and the draw distance still manages to impress as well. The game's visuals aren't without their problems, however. Taken on their own, each city in the game is very pretty to look at in that special medievalish way, but honestly, after a while, the cities all start to blend together. There really isn't that much difference between Jerusalem, Acre, and Damascus, aside from some of the textures and architectures of the buildings, the guards that patrol the city, and the color filter that's associated with each region. But if you showed me a screenshot from Assassin's Creed, the only way I would be able to tell which city it was from would be because of the color filter, not because the cities themselves are distinctly designed. There's also not a lot of variation within each city themselves, as a lot of buildings and structures are copy-pasted ad nauseum, and this is something that following games in the series will not improve on. Unfortunately, the game has a lot of load-in and pop-in, which is something I particularly dislike in games because nothing ruins immersion more for me than seeing textures load more detail as I get closer. I understand that the game wouldn't look or run as good if it didn't do this, but personally, 9 times out of 10, I would prefer an overall less visually stunning game if it meant not having the amount of load-in that's present here and in most games. In terms of the game's sound, I think the sound design is actually really good. The sort of bustling yet calm quiet of the cities, due to there being no cars or technology, makes for a unique atmosphere not really found in any other open world games. I mean, there are a lot of fantasy open world games without technology, but they don't have bustling cities like Assassin's Creed does. The sounds of combat are in particular very satisfying and powerful, with the clashing of swords making a deep clanging sound. And when you finally land a killing blow on an enemy, the sound of flesh being sliced apart and bones breaking is an exhilarating and also haunting experience. Like, holy shit, I just killed this dude with my sword and I'm high on adrenaline. But I also feel like throwing up at the same time because that was horrible. I also really like the sound design of the Animus. It's very distinct and memorable, so much so that I think I could recognize the sound of the player entering the Animus anywhere. The voice acting is also overall very, very good, with most characters, even the smallest roles, having solid performances. I especially enjoyed hearing Nolan North as Desmond because even if Nolan North is in every game ever made, I'll never get tired of hearing him. And Kristen Bell as Lucy does a great job, and I honestly wish she was in more games. The only real letdown in terms of voice acting, in my opinion, is the voice for Altair. I've just never really liked his performance, even from my first playthrough. It's just a little too stiff and stilted. By the way, there aren't any subtitles for some reason in this game, which I hate because I always play with subtitles on, so if that's going to be an issue for you, I just wanted you to be aware. The musical score was written by Jesper Kyd, and even though I think it's not a bad score, I don't think I could pick out any memorable tracks from it. It's really more supposed to be for the background and atmosphere of the game, and it does that job very well. The year is 1191. You play as Altair ibn La'ahad, who is an assassin in the Brotherhood of the Assassiyuns, which are based off of a real cult that existed in the time period of the game. The enemies of the assassins are the Templars, who also existed in real life. The game takes place during the Third Crusade, which is a very underexplored time period in video games. The main goal of the game is to assassinate 9 Templar leaders and put an end to the Crusades. The plot gets a little more complicated than that with the introduction of the Piece of Eden, which is literally the apple of Eden from the Bible. You know, the thing that Adam and Eve ate and got them kicked out of the Garden of Eden? And God was like, "You had one job, me, damn it." Eventually, it's revealed that Al-Mualim, who was the leader of the Brotherhood, was originally a Templar that betrayed the other Templars in order to get the Apple of Eden all for himself, and Altair ends up having to kill him at the end of the game. So like I said, the game's plot is solid, and I think the Animus idea is an ingenious framing device for a franchise. But the reason why I like the game's story is because of its themes, ideas, and character arcs. Altair begins the game as an arrogant asshole who thinks he is above the creed of the Brotherhood and knows better than anyone else. This attitude leads him to fail spectacularly on a mission to retrieve the Apple of Eden from its resting place before the Templars can get it. And due to his failure, the Templars manage to find the Brotherhood's hideout, leading to a clash between the two forces that results in a number of casualties for both sides. Because of this, Al-Mualim strips Altair of his rank and weapons. Al-Mualim then gives Altair a chance at redemption, however. If Altair can kill the 9 Templar leaders, then he will have his rank restored to him. So at its core, Altair's story is about an arrogant and self-centered man whose actions cause harm to everyone around him, learning to humble himself and realize that he does not know nearly as much as he thinks he does. At the start of the game, the other members of the Brotherhood treat Altair with disdain because of his attitude and failure. But as the game unfolds and Altair learns humility and proves his skills can be useful to the Brotherhood, the various other assassins that you interact with recognize the changes within him and begin to treat him with more respect and see him as a true member of the Assassins. The most poignant of these interactions being with Malik, who was, along with his brother, sent on the same mission to retrieve the piece of Eden that Altair fucked up so badly. And as a result of Altair's fuck-up, Malik lost his arm and his brother was killed. So, understandably, Malik doesn't like Altair very much for most of the game. But he does take note of Altair's gradual change, and at the end of the game is one of the only assassins to stand with Altair against Al-Mualim. None of this is groundbreaking, but it is handled well. Whenever Altair kills a target, there's a cutscene of them having a conversation that explains the target's reasoning as to why they did what they did. At first, Altair doesn't give much thought to the ramblings of these supposed madmen that Al-Mualim claims are evil, a claim which a quick glance at the Templars' actions would support. However, as the game goes on, Altair begins to question the killings as each member of the Templars believe themselves to be ultimately doing good despite having to do a bit of evil. For instance, the mad Dr. Garnier de Noblis conducts medical experiments on people who were seemingly kidnapped off the streets of neighboring cities by fellow Templar Talal and sent to him as test subjects. And when Altair goes to assassinate Garnier, we witness this display of cruelty and violence, which solidifies the idea that Garnier must be killed. But when we actually make it into the makeshift hospital, we certainly hear some patients claiming Garnier does nothing but torture them, but we also hear some patients thanking him for healing their minds and bodies. And when Altair does kill him, in the death cutscene, Garnier claims that all he was trying to do was to help these people. Some of the themes and ideas explored in the game are the concepts of perspective, faith, free will, religion, blind obedience, individual thought, and the nature of good and evil. Very thought-provoking stuff that is handled, in my opinion, rather deftly and subtly, which is very nice. One big complaint I have with the story, though, is that all the cutscenes and the tutorial are unskippable, meaning if you just want to experience the game and don't care about the story, well, you're out of luck. Assassin's Creed has a sort of progression to its gameplay in the sense that when Altair gets demoted by Al-Mualim, he loses his weapons and abilities, meaning that throughout the game, after each successful assassination attempt, Altair receives an ability or weapon back. This makes sense for the weapons, as Al-Mualim can just take Altair's sword or throwing knives, but it doesn't really make much sense that he takes away Altair's abilities, such as being able to dodge in a fight or grab ledges when falling. I guess the only reason Altair doesn't use them is because Al-Mualim told him not to? Whatever, hashtag gamer things. The majority of your playtime will inevitably be spent free running around cities and climbing up buildings, which is a lot of fun and something they got right the first time around. It's great fun to scale the viewpoints in each city, synchronize to get a sweeping camera pan of the vista, then perform a leap of faith to get down in an incredibly unrealistic yet fun way. The platforming here works relatively well, all things considered. There are unfortunately frequent stops in the flow of free running when Altair will get caught on a handhold for seemingly no reason, or won't be able to reach a handhold despite probably being able to, or jumping off at the wrong angle of a building and plummeting to his death. But these flaws don't ruin the game, they just make it occasionally frustrating. All you have to do is hold the right trigger and a face button and point in the direction you want to go, and Altair will do most of the work for you. The climbing and free running is pretty automated and often criticized by some gamers for its lack of depth or challenge, but I've always felt that the real challenge to the free running is not the mechanical complexity of it, which there is basically none, but rather trying to figure out the most efficient and optimized route to your destination. Like how a real parkour person tries to plan out their route and choose the best way to get from point A to B. What do we call people who do parkour? Free runners? Parkour artists? Lunatics? The game uses what it calls a puppeteering control system, where you have two different modes, which are low profile and high profile, and the actions you can perform are different depending on which profile you are currently in. When you're in low profile, you can do things like gently push past civilians or blend into a crowd so as to not attract the attention of the guards. While in high profile, you can initiate free running and barrel through crowds, which will attract the guards' attention. The puppet part of it comes from each face button being linked to a part of Altair's body. The A button is linked to his legs, the B and X button to each of his arms, and the Y button to his head. Altair has access to an ability called Eagle Vision, which basically allows Altair to know which NPCs in the world are enemies, neutral, targets, or friendlies. It's kind of like a precursor to the Arkham series Detective Vision. It isn't as practical though, since in the first game it goes into a first-person perspective and you are unable to move while using it. Later games in the series will change this. So here's how the game is structured more or less. Altair receives a target from Al-Mualim, then he needs to make his way down from the Brotherhood base in Masyaf and ride on a horse all the way to one of the cities. When you get there, you need to do investigation missions to learn information about your target, such as his whereabouts and any opportunities that you can use to assassinate them. Then once you've gathered enough info, you need to go to the Assassin's Bureau in each city, explain your plan to the assassin in charge of the bureau, and once they give you their blessing, you can go and do the assassination. Then once you've escaped the guards and returned to the bureau to tell them of your success, you get teleported back to Masyaf and do the whole thing all over again. This happens 9 times in the game, which leads me to the biggest problem with Assassin's Creed, which is the repetition and lack of variety and content. The game actually wants you to go to the Assassin's Bureau before you begin your investigation for story purposes, but you don't have to and can do your investigations before you go to the bureau, and the story adjusts accordingly, which is a nice detail. The first time you visit a city, you need to ride your horse from Masyaf and through another large area to get to each city. But once you have visited each city for the first time, you unlock the ability to fast travel to the outside of the city once you reach the end of Masyaf, which definitely cuts down the travel time. But I do wish you could just teleport from the Brotherhood HQ directly to the city's Assassin's Bureau. The first few times you do the investigation missions, it's pretty cool. You actually feel like an assassin gathering information for your mission. There are 5 different kinds of investigation missions on console. Pickpocketing missions, which are exactly what they sound like. Interrogation missions, where you beat people up for information. Eavesdropping missions, which are again self-explanatory. And 2 different types of assassins informant missions. One of them is where you have to help a fellow assassin who's been compromised by assassinating the people who know about him, and then he tells you what he knows about your Templar target. The other informant mission is basically a race mission where you have to collect a certain number of flags within a time limit to prove to them that you are a capable assassin. This is the only mission that doesn't really make sense given the context, but again, hashtag gamer things. Unfortunately, these investigation missions get old quickly, especially the informants missions, which I basically never did again after the first assassination. For each assassination, there are 6 available investigation missions, but thankfully you only need to do 2 or 3 of them to unlock the actual assassination. Ubisoft evidently agrees with the sentiment that there isn't enough variety within these missions, as the PC version of the game, which was released a few months after the console version, and dubbed the director's cut of the game, came with an additional 4 mission types. These being Archer Assassination, Rooftop Race Challenge, Merchant Stand Destruction Challenge, and Escort Challenges. Since I've never played the PC version of the game, I have no idea if these missions are fun or how much they help the feeling of repetition of the game. The side missions fare worse than the investigation missions. Actually, calling them side missions is a bit of an exaggeration given that there's only one goal for them, so I think side objectives would be a much more appropriate title. There are 2 and only two side objectives in the game, those being the viewpoints and the citizens. The viewpoints are the better of the two, requiring you to climb on top of specific high buildings and structures in order to synchronize with the map, revealing more of the map. This is the first instance of the Ubisoft Tower, which they have used in a few of their other franchises, and even other games not made by Ubisoft have borrowed the design and implementation of. Honestly, even though these are basically just as repetitive as anything else in the game, I will never get tired of climbing up somewhere high, seeing an expansive and sweeping view of the environment, only to jump all the way back down. The other side objective is the Rescue Citizen one, which consists of walking up to a group of guards, attacking a citizen, and killing them all. This repeats for each district of each city ad nauseum. The same voice lines for the guard every time, the same 2 or 3 thank you lines from the citizens, and after I completed all the citizen objectives for the first district, I thought to myself, should I complete all districts? Nah, there are a couple more things to do in the game actually, those being collecting flags in each areas of the game and killing Templar soldiers. Both of these things are again copy-pasted and repeated to the point where even the first time I played the game when I was totally into it and had all the time in the world, I still gave up on finishing these tasks. There just isn't any tangible reason to do any of these side objectives or collectibles aside from being a completionist. Now I want to take a second here to talk about the absolute worst part of the game besides the repetition, which are the, let's call them obstacle NPCs. There are 2 of them, the first one being the beggar. This is a female NPC who will come up to the player and get in the way of their movement, forcing you to navigate around them. Aside from the fact that every single one of these NPCs has the same dialogue every single time you encounter them, they're honestly not that bad, because you can just walk past them with a gentle push and they don't really blow your cover if you're on a mission. But the second one is the stupidest fucking idea in the whole game. Apparently Ubisoft calls these NPCs troublemakers. I call them fucking assholes. These guys wander around the streets and will shove you out of their way, making Altair enter a stumbling animation that you can't recover from and just have to wait out. But if you happen to come across more than one of these guys, then the fun really begins, because they can continually shove Altair around like they're bullying him for his lunch money, and you just have to wait it out because you can't fucking do anything while the animation plays. These guys will lock onto you once you get close enough to them and make a beeline right to you and only you, no matter what you're doing. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is to be on a mission, especially one of the story assassinations, and go through the whole thing of quietly sneaking around your target, getting close enough to strike, only to see one of these fucking pricks come out of nowhere and blow your cover. I honestly think that these guys might be the worst NPCs I've ever seen in a video game. Period. When I was younger, I used to get so frustrated by them that I would go on a killing spree, stabbing these guys until I got desynchronized. But this playthrough, I only punched a troublemaker once. I truly am growing as a person. Assassin's Creed has an enemy awareness system which tells you how aware of your presence the guards in the city are. There is an indicator on the top left of the screen that shows you what your current status is. When guards are alerted to you and are chasing after you, the only way to go back to being incognito is to either kill all the guards chasing you or hide in a hiding spot for a few seconds until the guards give up. There are 3 hiding spaces: piles of hay, rooftop curtain things, and benches. The system is a little fucky, to be honest. You are basically invisible in normal gameplay if you use your blend button, but guards will immediately decide that you are a person that needs to die immediately if you are galloping on your horse, which I always did because you can just outrun all of them, and I am not going to go by every single guard at a snail's pace just to avoid being discovered. Speaking of stealth, the hidden blade is one of the best weapons in a video game ever. Walking up behind a target, silently assassinating them, and disappearing into the crowd is one of the most satisfying experiences you can have in gaming. The hidden blade is probably the most recognizable and iconic thing about the series, and Ubisoft got it right the first time. Mostly. You can't do special assassinations like you can in future installments, so the hidden blade is pretty limited, but that didn't stop it from becoming the face of the franchise. Speaking of weapons, the combat is fine. It's not great, but it's not bad. Altair can block, dodge, and counter for defensive maneuvers, and for offensive, he can do quick swings, heavy swings, break blocks, and grab enemies to throw them off balance for an easy kill. Altair has a sword and small blade he can use during combat. He also has throwing knives that you can use during fights, but honestly those are much better suited for stealthily taking down the archers that are stationed on the rooftops from a distance. The combat is pretty heavily based on timing. If you can successfully time your strikes in an enemy, you can do an insta-kill move. And once you unlock the counter ability early on, well, that basically becomes the go-to option for winning fights, as it also insta-kills most enemies. The fights themselves aren't that challenging, as you can more or less just hold down the block button indefinitely and stop most attacks. No matter how many enemies you fight, they only attack one at a time. And you do fight a lot of enemies, as increasing the number of enemies per fight is how Ubisoft decided to increase the difficulty as the game goes on, especially near the end of the game where the number of enemies you fight is frankly ridiculous and stops being fun long before you're done, as there isn't any real enemy variety to speak of. You begin the game fighting guards and you end the game fighting the same basic guards. Once again, repetition and lack of variety is the weak point of this game. Funnily enough, however, the game's biggest weakness is also one of the reasons I liked it. The later games in the series have so many things you can do in them that it honestly becomes overwhelming, and by comparison, the bare-bones, stripped-down simplicity of the first game was kind of refreshing. And I still think that this is the best game in the series in terms of how well it captures the feeling of actually being an assassin. So seeing as this is the first video in the Ubisoft Retrospective series, I think it's time we take a look at how and if Ubisoft's shitty business practices influenced the quality of this game. Short answer, they didn't. Because this game was made in the year of our Lord 2007, long before microtransactions entered the console scene, and even before things like season passes or day one DLC or multiplayer codes became a thing, Ubisoft Montreal just genuinely had an idea that they wanted to make. Unfortunately, due to time constraints and the majority of the development cycle being taken up by the creation of the Anvil Next engine, they didn't get to fully realize the vision they had for Assassin's Creed. But it wasn't due to Ubisoft being greedy or lazy, as they have been in more recent years. The first game is a good first draft. It's got all the necessary ingredients and they're all relatively well done. They just needed another attempt at it to get to where they truly wanted it to be, which is a second chance that they definitely capitalized on. Assassin's Creed has enough good ideas and content for a really great game that's about 3 to 4 hours long, that ultimately got spread out and diluted across a 12 to 15 hour game. Repetition and tedium really is this game's Achilles heel. I felt relieved when I remembered that I didn't have to do all the investigations to unlock the assassinations, which, being happy that I don't have to play all the content a game offers, is a very telling sign that something isn't quite right. Ultimately though, I did enjoy revisiting this game, but I don't think I'll ever play it again unless there's a Steam sale for the PC version, just so I can play it with 60 frames per second and check out the extra mission types. If you're a fan of the Assassin's Creed series but have never played the first one, is it worth going back and experiencing it? Well, I would say yes, as long as you temper your expectations and are genuinely interested in the story of the franchise. Everything related to the story is still really good, but the gameplay has obviously been refined and improved on in later iterations, so don't expect the same type of gameplay experience. If you're someone who isn't familiar with the Assassin's Creed franchise, I would definitely recommend starting with a more recent entry into the series as opposed to this one. I'm going to give Assassin's Creed a 6.5 out of 10. Closer to a 7 than a 6, but just not good enough to reach it in my opinion. There you have it, the first video in this big ass project of mine. This is just the starting line. I cannot wait to play Assassin's Creed 2. Literally, I couldn't wait. I started playing the second game before I even finished the video for the first game, so look forward to seeing that video. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like, maybe subscribe, and maybe leave a comment sharing your own thoughts on the first Assassin's Creed game. Thanks for watching, adios.